HOA Stories. HOA Karen tries to find me $100,000 didn't know I a real estate billionaire. A woman in a cheap power suit, the color screaming discount bin, slammed a fine notice on my doorstep. $100,000. For violations I'd never even heard of. Smirking, a truly unpleasant expression that tightened her already severe features, she had absolutely no idea she had just messed with the wrong homeowner. You see, I'm not just another resident. I own half the properties in this neighborhood, including hers. It all started when I moved into what I thought would be a peaceful, upscale neighborhood. I'd spent years building my real estate empire, flipping properties, investing in commercial and residential real estate, and quietly amassing a fortune. My goal was never to be flashy or boast about my success. In fact, I enjoyed living under the radar. I chose this neighborhood precisely because it was supposed to be quiet, elegant, and drama-free. That was my first mistake. The moment I closed on the house, I noticed something off. I had barely parked my car in the driveway when an older woman in a blazer, the kind that screamed suburban authority, marched up, clipboard in hand. Her expression was stern, as if she were about to reprimand a child for misbehaving. "Excuse me, you're the new homeowner?" she asked, her tone sharp, laced with an almost accusatory edge. I nodded. "Yeah, that's me." She pursed her lips, giving me a once-over like I was some stray animal that had wandered onto her pristine property. "I'm Brenda Miller, president of the HOA. We have rules here. I suggest you read through the handbook thoroughly. You'll find everything you need to know about maintaining compliance." I wasn't worried. I had lived in HOA communities before. Some were fine, others were power-hungry nightmares. I wasn't sure where this one landed yet, but I had a good feeling it wasn't going to be pleasant. A week passed, and I received my first notice. A warning about my driveway. Apparently, my concrete was too light in shade, violating the neighborhood's uniformity standards. I laughed it off. Surely this was a joke. But then another notice arrived. This time, I was fined $500 for my trash bins being visible from the street. I had barely settled in, and the violations were piling up like an ambush. I decided to do a little digging, talking to a few neighbors. I quickly learned Brenda was a tyrant. She ran the HOA like her personal fiefdom, imposing ridiculous fines on residents for minor infractions. Several homeowners had been forced to pay thousands in bogus penalties, some even losing their homes due to foreclosure when they couldn't keep up. "She's been doing this for years," one elderly neighbor whispered to me, his voice trembling with fear. I wanted to sell my house, but she blocked my listing, saying I hadn't pre-approved the color of my shutters with the HOA. I had to pay thousands just to be allowed to sell my own property. The more I heard, the more disgusted I became. It was clear Brenda wasn't just a busybody enforcing rules. She was running a full-blown extortion racket. Then the bombshell dropped. A thick envelope arrived in my mailbox, marked urgent. Inside was an official-looking document from the HOA, outlining a series of infractions I had supposedly committed. The total fine? $100,000. I blinked. That had to be a mistake. I flipped through the pages, scanning the list. My grass was too green. My windows reflected too much sunlight. My mailbox was not to code. It was absurd. It was robbery. I stormed over to the HOA office, located inside the neighborhood clubhouse. Brenda sat behind a desk, lazily flipping through a magazine. When she saw me, she smirked, a truly sickening display of smug satisfaction. "Ah, Mr. Carter," she said, feigning politeness. "I assume you're here about your violations?" I dropped the papers on her desk, the force of it making her jump slightly. "You think I'm going to pay this nonsense?" She raised an eyebrow, a picture of false innocence. "If you don't, we'll place a lien on your home. You wouldn't be the first." I narrowed my eyes, my blood boiling. "You're seriously trying to extort me for $100,000? Brenda leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, a cruel smile playing on her lips. "It's not extortion. It's the rules. If you don't like it, you're free to move." I smiled, a slow, deliberate smile that I knew would unnerve her. "You really have no idea who I am, do you?" She scoffed, a dismissive wave of her hand. "I don't care who you are. The HOA has full authority here. You signed the contract when you moved and I didn't argue. I didn't threaten. I simply turned around and walked out." She thought she had won. She thought she had another victim trapped in her web. She had no idea she had just declared war on the wrong man. Because what Brenda didn't know, what no one in the neighborhood knew, was that I wasn't just some random homeowner. I was a billionaire real estate mogul, and while she thought she was holding all the cards, I was about to flip the entire deck on her. I didn't react immediately. Brenda expected me to fight her right then and there, to beg or argue, to cower under her so-called authority. But I had played bigger games than this. I wasn't just going to beat her. I was going to dismantle her entire empire. I started with the basics. If an HOA is corrupt, there's always a paper trail. These scams don't run on Brenda's intimidation alone. They need fraudulent finances, hidden accounts, and a network of complicit board members. The first step? Talking to the neighbors. I took a casual approach, knocking on doors and striking up conversations. Most residents were cautious at first. Brenda had created a culture of fear. But once I made it clear that I wasn't just another homeowner but someone willing to fight, the stories started pouring in. I paid almost $150,000 in fines last year, an elderly man named Mr. Dawson said, his voice filled with a mixture of anger and despair, and I never saw a single improvement in the neighborhood. Just more rules. She controls everything. A younger couple added, their faces etched with frustration. She rejected our fence 3 times, saying the wood was too rustic. Then she approved the exact same fence for her friend down the street. One woman even whispered, her eyes darting nervously around, "People who fight back end up with surprise violations, and if you refuse to pay, foreclosure. She takes their homes." That caught my attention. I needed proof. Luckily, I had an ace up my sleeve. While Brenda saw me as just another clueless homeowner, I had extensive real estate connections, including access to property records, financial filings, and legal experts who could help me trace the HOA money flow. Within 48 hours, I had a detailed report in my hands, and what I found was beyond anything I expected. The HOA was a full-blown extortion scheme. Brenda and her board had been funneling fines into private accounts under the guise of community improvements. They claimed money was going to landscaping, clubhouse renovations, and security enhancements, but none of those services actually existed. In fact, most of the neighborhood's so-called projects had been paid for on paper only. The money never left Brenda's controlled bank accounts. And the foreclosures? Even worse. Brenda had personally acquired 4 properties in the last 2 years, houses she had forced into foreclosure with excessive fines. Then, like clockwork, those houses were mysteriously sold at below market value to LLCs owned by her relatives and friends. I had enough evidence to ruin her, but I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to take everything from her, turning the tables completely. First, I made some strategic property moves. Using shell companies, I quietly started buying properties in the neighborhood from residents desperate to escape Brenda's tyranny. By the end of the week, I had acquired over 40% of the homes in the HOA. Second, I dug deeper into the HOA board. Most of them were nothing more than Brenda's lapdogs, but a couple of them were weak links, people who weren't as involved in the corruption but had gone along with it out of fear or financial benefit. I approached one of them, Ted, the HOA treasurer. He was a nervous wreck when I met him at a local cafe, his hands shaking as he held his coffee cup. I didn't know how deep it went, he stammered when I confronted him with the financial discrepancies. I mean, I knew Brenda was aggressive, but I didn't realize she was actually stealing. "She's about to go down," I told him, my voice firm but calm. The only question is whether you go down with her. Ted swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. Then, in a shaky voice, he muttered, "What do you need me to do?" Perfect. With Ted flipping and my property acquisitions growing, I was no longer just a resident fighting an HOA. I was an owner with power. I knew Brenda wouldn't see it coming, so I let her think she was still in control. That's when I got another violation notice. This time for $25,000. Apparently, my front door was the wrong shade of beige. I smirked as I read the letter. Brenda thought she was playing a game. She had no idea she was about to lose everything. The moment I received the new violation notice, I knew Brenda was doubling down. She wasn't just coming after me. She was trying to break me. But I wasn't some clueless homeowner she could bully into submission. I was about to hit back hard. Instead of reacting immediately, I let her think she was still in control. I went about my days like normal, giving no indication that I was setting up her downfall. While she smirked behind her HOA desk, dreaming of my inevitable surrender, I was making moves behind the scenes. A few days later, Brenda decided to confront me in person. She strutted up my driveway, smug as ever, and handed me another thick envelope. "You're officially in violation of multiple HOA rules," she said, barely containing her glee. "If you don't pay the fines within 30 days, we'll be forced to place a lien on your home. And if you don't resolve the issues after that." She gave a fake sympathetic shrug, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Foreclosure is always an option." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Foreclosure? Over a front door?" "It's not just the door," she snapped, her voice rising in indignation. "It's your landscaping, your mailbox, your window treatments, everything." I folded my arms and gave her a long, steady look. "You really don't know who I am, do you?" She scoffed, a dismissive snort. "I don't care who you are. The HOA has full authority here. You signed the contract when you moved in." I smiled, a genuine, confident smile this time. "Good to know." Then I handed her a thick envelope of my own. She took it, confused, and opened it. Her face turned ghost white as she scanned the document. This is an eviction notice," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. I nodded. "That's right. You've been living here rent-free for years, acquiring foreclosed homes through HOA corruption. But the thing is, you don't actually own your house anymore." She looked up, panic creeping into her eyes. "I do," I said casually. "I bought it last week." Brenda didn't believe me at first, but she quickly realized I was dead serious. I had been buying properties in the neighborhood for weeks, acquiring just enough to hold majority voting power in the HOA. I wasn't just some resident fighting against the board. I own the board, and I was about to use that power against her. I called for an emergency HOA meeting, something only a majority property owner could do. Brenda arrived with her usual confidence, flanked by the other corrupt board members, expecting to shut me down. She even had a smirk on her face when she sat down at the head of the table. But the moment I opened my folder and began laying out her crimes, that smirk vanished. Dropping the first bombshell, I started with the financial discrepancies. "According to HOA records," I said, my voice calm and steady, "residents have been paying thousands in fines every year, yet there's no actual record of where the money has gone." I pulled out bank statements, showing transfers into personal accounts linked to Brenda and her board members. "You've been stealing from the community," I continued, sliding the evidence toward the other board members. A few of them gulped, their faces paling. Brenda's face went red with fury. "This is nonsense," she spat. "You're not a lawyer. You don't have the authority to look at HOA finances." I leaned back in my chair, a knowing smile on my face. "Oh, but I do. Because I own 40% of the properties in this neighborhood." The room went dead silent. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "You're lying." she finally muttered, her voice trembling. I smiled. Would you like to see the purchase records? I slid another folder across the table. Brenda snatched it up, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. Every home I had acquired, every title transfer. She wasn't dealing with a desperate homeowner anymore. She was dealing with a real estate mogul who had just legally taken control of her entire domain. Brenda's confidence began to crack at this point. The other board members started turning on her. Ted, the HOA treasurer I had flipped earlier, cleared his throat nervously. I didn't know about the money laundering, he said, avoiding Brenda's furious gaze. Brenda shot him a death glare. Shut up, Ted. But Ted was done covering for her. If this is true, we could be in serious legal trouble. That's when I dropped the second bombshell. I pulled out my phone, pressed play, and a recording of Ted's confession filled the room. Brenda's been running this place like a dictatorship, Ted's voice said. She finds people into foreclosure, then her friends buy the houses cheap. It's a scam, man. I didn't know how deep it went, but she controls everything. Brenda lunged across the table, trying to grab my phone. You can't record that. That's illegal. She shrieked, her composure completely shattered. I yanked my hand back before she could touch me. Actually, in this state, it's perfectly legal to record a conversation as long as one party consents. And well, I consented. She turned to the rest of the board, her eyes wild with desperation. Are you all just going to sit there? Do something. But they were done. The HOA vice president, a quiet man who had clearly been waiting for an opportunity to escape her grip, spoke up. I vote to remove Brenda as HOA president. The vote was unanimous. You can't do this. Brenda screeched in outrage. I built this HOA. You can't. I cut her off, my voice firm. Brenda, it's over. She turned to me, pure hatred burning in her eyes. You think this is over? She hissed. You have no idea who you're messing with. I smirked. Neither did you. I turned to the board. Now, let's talk about dissolving this HOA. And just like that, Brenda's reign of terror was over. Brenda wasn't the type to go down without a fight. She had spent years ruling the HOA like her personal kingdom, and she wasn't going to let some nobody, as she still deluded herself into believing I was, take everything from her without a counterattack. The moment she was removed as HOA president, I expected retaliation. What I didn't expect was just how dirty she was willing to play. The very next morning, I woke up to find a fresh HOA violation notice taped to my door. Apparently, I had broken 7 new rules overnight. My house disrupted the aesthetic harmony of the neighborhood. My car was an improper model for the community. My hedges were 1.5 inches too tall. My mailbox was positioned at an incorrect angle. Each of these violations came with a hefty fine. Total amount? $75,000. I laughed. This was Brenda's way of trying to weaponize the HOA against me one last time. But Brenda wasn't just slapping me with bogus fines. She was actively trying to rebuild her empire. She started meeting with a handful of die-hard HOA loyalists, convincing them that the board meeting was invalid and that she was still the rightful HOA president. Word spread that she was forming an unofficial HOA committee. They began patrolling the neighborhood, issuing fake violation notices and intimidating residents. Some of them even tried blocking my driveway with their cars, claiming I was trespassing on my own property. The intimidation tactics didn't stop there. When the fines and scare tactics didn't work, Brenda took her next desperate step. She filed a lawsuit against me. She claimed I had illegally acquired properties through deception, coerced the HOA board into voting against her, and violated contractual obligations as a homeowner. Her goal? To drag me into a legal battle and drain me financially. She even started spreading rumors that I was a scammer, hoping to turn the neighborhood against me. What she didn't realize was who she was actually dealing with. Brenda made a huge mistake by going public with her lies. She tried painting herself as a victim of a hostile corporate takeover. She gave an interview to a local news station, sobbing about how I had stolen the neighborhood from her and how she was just trying to protect the community. That was the opening I needed. I made a few calls. Within 48 hours, every major news outlet had the real story. The headlines screamed, HOA president accused of extortion and fraud. Corrupt HOA scheme exposed. Homeowners fined into foreclosure. Real estate investor uncovers HOA scam. Ex-board president under investigation. When the story broke, Brenda panicked. She tried denying everything, but with all the financial documents, witness statements, and legal records I had compiled, she had no defense. Even residents who had once been terrified of her started coming forward, sharing their horror stories. Brenda had lost control of the narrative. Seeing the writing on the wall, Brenda's former board members started turning against her. Ted, the treasurer, publicly confessed to how Brenda had manipulated HOA funds. 2 other board members admitted to signing off on illegal foreclosures under her orders. Residents testified that she had threatened them with legal action if they spoke out. At this point, even the local authorities were taking an interest. Brenda's past financial dealings were being investigated for fraud, embezzlement, and even racketeering. She had gone from queen of the HOA to a disgraced scam artist under legal scrutiny. But she still wasn't done. When Brenda realized she was running out of options, she tried to come after me personally. Late one night, someone slashed the tires on my car. A few days later, my security cameras caught a couple of her HOA loyalists throwing garbage on my lawn. Then, a false complaint was filed against me with the city, claiming I was running an illegal business out of my home. It was a desperate attempt to intimidate me, but I had one final card left to play. The ultimate power move. I called another emergency board meeting, this time with the entire neighborhood invited. With the majority of homeowners on my side and Brenda effectively stripped of power, I made my final move. I'm proposing a vote to dissolve the HOA. The crowd erupted in applause. One by one, the residents voted yes. Brenda's biggest weapon, the HOA, was completely dismantled. No more fines, no more ridiculous rules, no more Brenda. With that vote, Brenda officially lost everything. She had no power, no control, nothing. And she knew it. As I left the meeting, she sat in the back of the room, shaking with rage, realizing her reign of terror was truly over. But the best part? I wasn't done with her yet. Brenda had lost everything. The HOA was officially dissolved, her influence shattered, and her reputation dragged through the mud. But I wasn't done with her yet. She had spent years terrorizing homeowners, stealing from them, and forcing people out of their own homes. I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing real consequences. The moment the vote to dissolve the HOA passed, I saw it in her eyes, pure panic. She sat frozen in the back of the room, gripping the edge of her chair as reality crashed down on her. No more HOA meant no more control, no more fines, no more foreclosure scams, and worst of all, no more easy money. The next day, Brenda made a pathetic attempt to claw her way back. She went door to door, begging people to reconsider the HOA decision, trying to convince them that I had tricked them into giving up valuable community protections. The problem? Nobody believed her anymore. The residents she had bullied for years laughed in her face. One homeowner, a retired Navy veteran named Mr. Dawson, didn't even let her finish her speech. "You're the reason I almost lost my house," he growled, slamming the door in her face. Another neighbor, a single mother Brenda had fined over $10,000 for unauthorized seasonal decorations, looked her dead in the eyes and said, "I hope you lose everything." Brenda's desperation was palpable. With the HOA gone, she had no steady income. Her scam was over. And that's when I decided to finish what I started. Brenda's downfall wasn't just about losing power. She had broken real laws, and I was going to make sure she faced the consequences. First, I filed a lawsuit against her personally for the money she stole. I had receipts. The fraudulent foreclosures? Exposed. The bogus fines? Documented. Second, I handed over all my evidence to the district attorney. Brenda had embezzled HOA funds for years. She had committed fraud by falsifying financial records. She had used her position to personally benefit from foreclosures. The moment the criminal charges were filed, she completely unraveled. Within a month, Brenda was hit with multiple lawsuits, her bank accounts were frozen, her house, one of the properties she had stolen, was seized by the state, and worst of all, she was arrested. The day it happened, I made sure to be there. I stood on my front porch, watching as 2 police officers escorted her out of her home in handcuffs. The once powerful HOA dictator was now a disgraced criminal. She saw me standing there, and for a brief moment, her face twisted with rage. "This is your fault!" she screamed. "You ruined everything." I just smiled. "No, Brenda. You did that all by yourself." She was thrown into the back of the police car, her face plastered all over the news that night. Brenda Miller, former HOA president, arrested for fraud and embezzlement. It was poetic justice. With Brenda gone, the neighborhood transformed overnight. The ridiculous fines were erased. Homeowners who had been wrongfully fined got their money back. The properties she stole were returned to their rightful owners. And as for the HOA, it never came back. Instead, I worked with the community to create a new system, one that actually benefited homeowners instead of exploiting them. No pointless rules, no abuse of power, no Brenda. Just neighbors living their lives in peace. Months later, I got one last piece of news about Brenda. After being convicted of fraud, she was ordered to pay back every stolen dollar. Since she had no assets left, she was forced to file for bankruptcy. Her name was ruined. No one wanted to work with her, no one wanted to rent to her, no one wanted anything to do with her. The woman who had once ruled the neighborhood like a queen was now broke, disgraced, and powerless. I heard she ended up renting a tiny apartment in a rundown part of town. No gated community, no HOA power, no money. Just a bitter, washed-up fraud who had finally gotten what she deserved. And I stayed in the neighborhood, enjoying my peaceful, HOA-free life. Every time I walked past Brenda's now abandoned house, I couldn't help but smile. Because in the end, the tyrant always falls. Brenda was gone. The HOA was dead. The neighborhood was finally free. But my work wasn't done yet. I didn't just want to win. I wanted to make sure something like this never happened again. I had already dismantled Brenda's empire, exposed her fraud, and made sure she faced real consequences. Now it was time for the final reveal. The day after Brenda's sentencing, a moving truck pulled up in front of her old house. It wasn't for her. She had been forced to sell everything to cover her legal fees. She was officially homeless. I happened to be outside when she showed up, a broken shell of the tyrant she once was. Her eyes, once filled with smug arrogance, were now hollow and defeated. She didn't say anything as she watched strangers move into what was once her kingdom. She just stood there, gripping a cheap suitcase, staring at the place she once controlled with an iron fist. Then, finally, she turned to me. "You took everything from me," she whispered, her voice shaking with rage. I met her gaze, completely calm. "No, Brenda. You did that to yourself." She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. She knew I was right. Without another word, she walked away, disappearing down the street, a nobody in a world where she once thought she was untouchable. Up until now, I had kept a low profile. Most people in the neighborhood had no idea who I really was. But after everything that happened, the truth started to spread. One evening at a neighborhood barbecue, a group of residents approached me. "Alex," one of them said, a hint of awe in his voice, "we heard a rumor. Is it true that you own, like, half the city?" I chuckled. Not quite, but close. The crowd murmured in shock. I looked you up, another neighbor admitted, his eyes wide. You're on Forbes' real estate mogul list. I thought you were just some guy moving into the neighborhood. Someone else added, shaking his head in disbelief. I shrugged. I am. I just happen to have the resources to take down a corrupt HOA. They stared at me for a long moment before breaking into applause. You saved this neighborhood. You actually took down Brenda. I can't believe we were living under a scam for so long. I smiled. Well, now you never have to deal with anything like that again. That night, we celebrated. For the first time in years, people weren't afraid of being fined for lawn decorations or mailbox placement. They were just living, and that was exactly what I wanted. A new, HOA-free paradise. With the HOA gone, I made sure the neighborhood stayed protected. I helped the residents set up a simple, non-intrusive neighborhood association, one that actually worked for homeowners, not against them. No unreasonable fines, no power-hungry leadership, just a community where people looked out for each other. I even funded a few upgrades, a new community park, security cameras for safety, and a neighborhood watch program, all without forcing anyone to pay insane dues or follow Brenda-style dictatorship rules. For the first time in a long time, the neighborhood was actually a good place to live. Months later, I got one final update about Brenda. Apparently, she was bouncing between cheap motels, struggling to find work. No one in real estate or HOA management would hire her. Her fraud conviction had blacklisted her from any position of authority, and her old HOA allies? They had all cut ties with her, pretending they had never been involved. Brenda had gone from queen of the neighborhood to a disgraced has-been, living paycheck to paycheck. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist in a rundown property management office. A fitting end for a woman who once thought she was untouchable. As I sat on my porch, watching the sunset over my now peaceful, HOA-free neighborhood, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had happened. One power-hungry woman had tried to rule people through fear. She thought she could bully, extort, and scam her way to the top. But in the end, she lost everything. Because when you push people too far, when you abuse your power for too long, eventually karma catches up. And I made sure Brenda got exactly what she deserved. Valuable lesson: the story highlights the importance of standing up against injustice and corruption, even when it seems daunting. It also shows that true power lies not in controlling others through fear and intimidation, but in integrity and community. What do you think? Should HOAs have this much power? Have you ever dealt with a Brenda-like HOA president? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more insane real estate battles.